This is the first in a three-part video series giving you a peek behind the scenes of my book, Finding the Energy to Thrive, Navigating the Maze of Life and Embracing Your Path to Wholeness. This book is available in paperback and on Kindle, and it's published on the 29th of May 2025. I am Katie Dean, the founder of the company Find My Energy, and in this video I will be sharing how I first came to write the book, why the metaphor of a maze is so apt, and the most important lesson I learned on my recovery path. Well, in many ways, I would say that my book journey actually started way back on the 22nd of November 2002. That was the day that I just collapsed on my way into work and my whole chronic fatigue story began unfolding. So I was inadvertently researching the material for the book from that day, but of course I didn't know that at the time. Then there's a second point at which I could say that this began, and that was back in 2015 on Sunday the 19th of July. And what happened was I literally woke up one morning and went, I need to write a book about chronic fatigue syndrome. It was a strange recollection actually. I'd had a really weird dream, incredibly vivid, like lucid dreaming, which for those of you who are on my mailing list, I will actually share that first journal entry because it recorded that dream. And actually looking back on it now, I can see there was a lot around feeling lost and confused in there, but I'll leave you to interpret that for yourselves. So what happened was I woke up and I don't know how or why, but I just knew that I needed to write this book. And at that time, what I was actually doing was journaling most days, but not just for personal sort of expression. I was journaling as if I was talking to an audience, and I was expressing my experience of chronic fatigue syndrome, both the frustrations, my striving to find a way out of this, and what I knew at that point about the science and what was going on inside my body. So that endeavour actually went on for 2 years. I stopped that journaling process in 2017 when I hit quite a low point on my recovery journey. But what I didn't realise at the time was that 2-year period was actually chronicling my second total collapse. And I ended up, as I say, stopping in 2017, but in 2020, something just sparked me to come back and revisit that. And again, this intention to write the book, explaining chronic fatigue syndrome. And I actually shared what I had written with a very good friend of mine who also happens to be a book editor. So she was the perfect person, somebody I could trust and would also give me valuable feedback, which she did, and it was along the lines of, wow, that's interesting, but really it's a stream of consciousness and it's not going to be that helpful for anybody else. But we talked it through and she could see sort of themes coming out, and that kind of gave me a new direction. But I still ended up parking the project then, and it was really in 2022 when I was reaching the final stages of my recovery that I picked it up. And I think at that point, having been through this journey, I then had this dual perspective. So I've actually used my original journals from the 2015 to 2017 period to sort of set up chapters within this book now. But Finding the Energy to Thrive is written from that perspective, looking back. And my intention has always been the same, really. It just frustrates me that there is so little that's really known publicly in the mainstream about chronic fatigue syndrome. And yet there are all these little pockets of researchers, practitioners, protocols, information that has got all the answers when we put it together. So we're living with this narrative of, oh, you've got chronic fatigue, that's it for life, there's nothing to be done. And in reality, as I and quite a lot of other people, interestingly, have discovered, that's not entirely true. There is an awful lot that we can do when we're pointed in the right direction. So I hope that Finding the Energy to Thrive is going to share that in a helpful way and support other people move through their own personal recovery journey. Well, strangely enough, the maze analogy is the one that dropped in around 2022 when I first began this book as you see it now. And it just seemed to sum everything up so beautifully. So there's the aspect of being lost, confused, being faced with lots of different pathways, but not really knowing where any of them is going to go. And that whole experience can seem quite scary, daunting, frustrating. So it had all those emotional aspects that sort of captured my experience when I was in the early stages of this illness. And at the same time, I felt it encapsulates this idea that rather than there being nothing we can do, there are actually lots of different ways that we can understand and support the energy flow within our body. And essentially, chronic fatigue syndrome is coming back to a lack of energy. There can be other complexities and add-ons in terms of particular systems or organs that are struggling, perhaps viral infections and the like. But even those, each of them has sort of pathways that are helpful. So I thought, well, this is a bit like a maze, and I'm a bit like a tour guide here. So I could take you through this fantasy maze and say, look, that path over there, that does this thing, and it might be helpful if this is what you're experiencing. And then you as the reader can decide, okay, yes, that's the path I need, or not. And I would love to have had that option for my journey, because my progress was really very haphazard and accidental, full of mistakes along the way. And again, it felt like walking through a maze where I was lost, and there would be points where I was going around in circles and thinking, I'm sure I've seen this portion before. Other points where I hit dead ends, and it's very difficult to navigate that, trying to hold on to hope and recognize that this thing that you'd put so much hope into actually isn't bringing the energy back to the body in the way that you desired. So yes, it seemed to encapsulate my experience perfectly. And when I look back, as I say, it was haphazard, but I did end up with this kind of route that I realized later on. So I'd started out seeing chronic fatigue syndrome purely as a physical illness, which it is. I mean, for anybody out there who's still thinking this is all in the head, no, it's not. It's very real and very much in the biology of your physical body. But there's a lot of other factors that play into that biology. So I began trying to understand, working with functional medics, doing things like using nutrition or protocols, so things that were very physical, and that got me a really long way. But then I met other people who were talking about sort of the mind-body connection and the impact of stress and areas like that, which I was incredibly resistant to in the beginning. But as I eventually realized that I was reaching a ceiling just by focusing on the physical level, I began to explore this mind-body connection. So I was exploring how my emotions were impacting my physical body, how behavioral patterns and your belief systems can all have an impact. Lo and behold, that got me another step further forwards. But still, I hit this ceiling where I wasn't quite feeling the energy and feeling like I was really myself. And that's when I ended up moving into what we describe as energy medicine, which covers an awful lot of different things. But that was another layer. It's, if you like, even less physical than the mental emotional, but it's still having this huge impact on our physical body. It's as if we go through this process where issues can start higher up in the energy field, and if they're not addressed, then they eventually end up manifesting as symptoms in the physical body. So that was how I would then sum up my experience looking back. But of course it felt much more muddled than that and haphazard as I was actually travelling through it. But the idea was that I could take my lessons and try and put them into more of a construct that shows people a potential path through, instead of this messy, haphazard, maybe this will work, maybe it won't, I don't know why, but let's try and see. That was really my experience at the time. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that's probably one of the most difficult aspects to comprehend at first. And I reflect, and you will actually see this in the book from the journaling records that I've included, that if you had said to me back in 2002 or even 2012 or even 2015 that I had this thing called a biofield or an energy body and that was going to be the key to recovery, I would probably have laughed in your face, walked the other way. I was really not open to that. It all sounds quite woo-woo and where's the foundation for this, and it doesn't match up with my experience, which is very physical. So those are certainly all attitudes that I felt myself and that I sometimes see in others when I'm sort of trying to explain this concept. But I found for me the best way of understanding it is actually bringing it back to physics. So when we're looking at our physical body, we're generally looking at the biology, so that would be sort of your bones, your skin and so on, and the chemistry, which is like the chemical reactions that produce hormones and so on. And that's quite mainstream. That's what your conventional doctor learns in med school and what you will probably have most experience of. But there's another layer to our body which is more based on physics. And to put that most simplistically, if you think of our body as like an field, so like an area of energy within which you've got little particles dancing around. And particles will tend to dance around randomly until you put some information into the field. And that's a very simplistic way of actually expressing the second law of thermodynamics within physics. Now, let's say that we inject a set of information which is a blueprint for creating a human being. Well, then these particles are going to join together and form atoms, which will join together to form cells, which come together to form organ systems, and basically you end up with this physical body that you know. And at the same time, that field of information and all those little particles are still there underneath. So if the physical experience that we're having is not what we desire, or it's uncomfortable in any way, yes, this could be taking place on the physical level, but it can also be taking place as a reflection of the information that's sitting in our field of energy. So when I'm talking about information, I would obviously be talking about what is directing our cells to do their job, the physical body parts. But then we can also be talking about emotions. They're pieces of information that are sitting in our field and flowing and causing our particles to take on certain directions. So would our thoughts be? And then you can also bring in more metaphysical aspects, as in consciousness and the way we interact with one another. It's all this huge pool of information which is impacting and driving our experience all of the time. So if you're willing to accept that idea, then logically, if your physical experience is not that which you desire, it is possible to look back at the information in the field and make a change, and then the change will eventually feed through to a different physical experience. So that is essentially what I learned when I started learning about the biofield and about energy healing, and that just blew my mind, and it also blew open the door to real deep root level healing rather than just finding ways to manage my energy levels. And that is, well, it is literally what made the difference between sort of existing and finding myself in control. So for me, this was mind-blowing, but also incredibly empowering. And it's how I now approach everything. So yes, I've found my body can now generate energy enough for me to live the life that I desire, but I'm still growing. I'm still finding more layers to clear, finding more joy, connecting to more peace. All of that journey still continues on now as I'm working with this concept of me as a field of energy and the information that's driving the physical experience that manifests. So I don't know how that will resonate or land with you, but that's my current thinking and probably the most simplistic way I can put this concept at the moment.